Every mixer has their own approach for creating drum tones. One of the most common approaches is to blend multiple sources to create one final monster tone. In this clip, Jens shows you his approach to blending snares. He takes a familiar approach using samples, but another technique with the organic drum tones from the track to create something special. Check it out and enjoy.
And with a snare, I'm gonna have to try to find samples that sound sort of real world, but can add a depth dimension and yeah, something that sounds a little better than this. Typically, if I recorded this myself, so I assume that I've been checking phase while recording between top and bottom mic. You can see that maybe the time relation here could be a little better, like the typical 10-15 sample delay on the bottom mic. That usually sounds better if that's actually slided back a little bit. You can listen to that. Smallest of differences, really. The level of my bottom microphone is something that I would have to determine a little bit as I layer samples, and depending on if I'm using and how much I'm using the samples. The more samples I'm using, usually the more of the bottom mic I use to sort of inject some real randomness to the high frequencies in the overall mix of samples and mics. And it all depends on how it sounds, really. For some mixes, I would really go without the bottom mic. I guess personally, I prefer a sound that is not so much depending on the bottom. But with some playing styles, if there's a lot of ghost notes going on, and you want a real sounding snare, it's almost a necessity to have the bottom strings there for it to sound natural enough. Yeah, and about the samples, I think now is probably a time where I would start to bring them in, which is a little sooner. If I felt that the playing here was and thus the sound was a little bit better, I think I would have tried to move on further into the mix before putting samples in. But I feel that I would need a little bit of support here to know where I'm going with other stuff. So I'm going to do that, but what I'm going to do is bring in my overheads a little bit again. Guitars. And then I've prepared a smorgasbord of samples. I could call this advertisement for my own products, but I am actually using this myself, and it's been sort of a revelation. I did this drum sample pack, and finally I have all my samples that I've collected over the years actually neatly organized and sort of properly made. My assistant sometimes uses like a contact instrument thing that we have, but personally I go for Traeger 2. All my stuff, and what I usually do is that I set up like a bunch of them, see where I can get at, and then try to narrow it down. I don't want to end up with too many, but sometimes it's just, yeah, I feel that I need like a selection of them. One that brings attack, another one that brings depth, some that brings ambience only. You guys who have seen me mix before, you probably know that I have this D-drum microphone, for example, a sample on the snare that I like to use. It's called Spike Me here. It's a very dirty name, so I don't know who labeled these.
I don't either.
So So if I have a pretty good recorded snare, I could usually just go with some of this, the spike sample and maybe an ambience. Yeah, sometimes that is enough, like a little bit of spike bite, a little bit of ambience. Something that I also do, but I'm probably not going to do on this one because I don't think the snare has any like natural ring or anything that I feel like I want to preserve. But I showed this on the session yesterday that what I usually do is that I would duplicate my original snare track twice actually. And maybe with the EQ going, but usually also with a unique EQ. And then have one that I label like ring and the other one smack or attack. And then I would sort of try to use a dynamic effect that retains only the sustain. So bring Transient Designer, industry standard plugin or effect, I should say. The plugin sounds almost as good as the original hardware. I mean, there's this like overtones that's you can hear that the nice overtones are sort of muted with the moon gel, and you get this like forced overtone that's a little too high, like someone is strangling the snare a little bit, and you get a lot of bleed. So again, this is something that I tend to do, but right for this session, I'm not sure if I can use it. I would probably need to create this with a sample instead if I want that sort of length dimension. But just for the sake of it, let's keep that in. And then for the smack one or attack one, I would not use the Transient Designer. I don't think it sounds as good for retaining attack only, but there is a soft tube one called Transient Shaper that I tend to use. There's also a Sonox Transient transmod that I tend to use quite a lot, maybe sometimes on the full drum bus. Also, while doing mastering, I can sometimes use this transmod thing on the whole mix actually, just to revive the snare in the track a little bit. Or if I do stem mastering, I can use that on the drum bus. So this one, similar to the Transient Designers that we know, this has the function of working only on a portion of the frequency range, like crossover. Sometimes I would do like low max sustain, high max punch. I could create some pretty interesting results, like so, to mix in. But since I already have a ring here, there's a danger to this crossover thing because it's gonna fuck up the phase if I mix it together with the real thing. So in this case, I'm just gonna go wideband. And since I already have my ring, from this one, I don't want any ring, I just want the punch. I want the punch to be fast. Let's see. I'm just sort of creating like a clipped crack out of it. Because I have to think about what is it that I want out of this. I wanted to bring back something into the original mic that the original mic was lacking, which I think is this sort of little clip. And that way it starts to sound like there is actually a stick attack to the rim. And then I have the ring one. Yeah, and now the bleed is getting so loud when I put that in that I have to sort of find ringy frequencies and try to avoid the bleed a little bit. It won't sound good with gates or anything like that. sort of. Now the bleed is not that disturbing, but yeah, I stress this again. If the snare would sound better, like on the Septic Flesh session I did yesterday, this would make more sense for me. But this is still a method that I sort of usually have there. And then throughout the session, as I load more stuff into the mix, I have these to easily sort of control the level of the ring and attack that will appear different depending on how much stuff I push into the mix. So that's that. So let's see if we have those a little bit in now, and then I could start look for some stuff. So like I said, my assistant already prepared some things here. I'm using Trigger 2, and I have some like pre-blended options. It has some like room and ambience to them that usually can be nice. But I also have the option of using like dry and wet signals separately. I usually prefer having some sort of ambience or overheads going in my samples, at least for the more prominent ones, so they just sort of mix in with the drums a little better, so I don't get like, here is the sample and here is the rest of the drum kit. But it all depends. Can be good to have separated. I usually sort of go for a mix and then I print them down. So yeah, so depending on the session, I have a whole variety of stuff here that I usually go for. Some of my own samples, some external stuff as well. And then I would sort of go through and see what works the best. So what I had my assistant do here as well, I'm gonna just hide and make those inactive, because what I have here on the side is actually, so they are printed as stereo files. Oh, there they are. Including some of this ambience and room to my taste.